I spent 31 years as a county sheriff's investigator in Beaufort County, South Carolina. By the time I retired, I had worked 847 cases. I know what a controlled situation looks like, and I know what chaos pretending to be calm looks like. I know the difference because I spent 3 decades learning it the hard way. I am telling you this not to impress you. I am telling you this because it matters to what happened on the night my grandson called me from the emergency room at 2:47 in the morning. His name is Owen. He is 14 years old. He has his mother's eyes, my daughter Patricia's eyes, and he has the same stubborn set to his jaw that I see in the mirror every morning. When he was 6, he used to follow me around the yard while I checked the fence line, asking me questions I did not always know how to answer. Why do birds fly south? Why does the creek smell different after rain? Why do people lie, Grandpa? I told him that last one was complicated. I told him we would talk about it when he was older. I did not expect the conversation to come the way it did. My phone rang at 2:47. I was already half awake. I have not slept well since my wife passed 4 years ago, and the house makes sounds at night that I have never fully made peace with. I saw Owen's name on the screen, not his father's name, not a number I did not recognize. Owen's name. I picked up before the second ring, Grandpa. His voice was flat in that particular way that means a person is working very hard not to fall apart. I know that voice. I have heard it in interview rooms across 3 decades. It is the voice of someone who has already cried as much as they can and is now operating on something colder than emotion. I'm here, I said. I was already sitting up, already reaching for the lamp. I'm at Beaufort Memorial. I borrowed a nurse's phone. I didn't know who else to call. I did not ask him why he did not call his father. I already felt the shape of that answer sitting in the room with me. Are you hurt? A pause. 1 beat too long. Yes. Which part of you? My arm. They think it might be broken. They did x-rays. I was already pulling on my boots. I have a system for getting dressed in the dark. I developed it over years of middle-of-the-night calls, and I have never been more grateful for it than I was in that moment. Who brought you in? Another pause. A neighbour. Mrs. Alderman from across the street. She heard me in the yard. I stopped moving for exactly 3 seconds. I filed that information in the place where I keep things that need to be returned to later. I'm coming, I said. Do not talk to anyone except medical staff until I get there. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. Owen. Yes, sir. I am already in my truck. That was almost true. I was putting my keys in my hand as I said it. Beaufort Memorial is 22 minutes from my house on a normal night. I made it in 16. I'm not proud of that, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I pulled into the emergency parking lot and I sat in the truck for 4 seconds before I got out. 4 seconds. That is a habit I developed in year 7 of my career after I walked into a situation without taking that pause and made a decision I spent 8 years regretting. 4 seconds of absolute stillness. You assess what you know. You name what you do not know. You decide what kind of person you are going to be when you walk through that door. I knew Owen was hurt. The injury might be a fracture. A neighbour, not a parent, had brought him in. He had not called his father. I did not know the extent of the injury, who was responsible, whether my son-in-law's wife was already inside that building. I decided I was going to be calm. I was going to be the person who controls the room, not the person reacting to it. Then I got out of the truck. The ER at Beaufort Memorial at 3 in the morning has a particular quality of light. Fluorescent, flat. The kind that makes everyone look like they have not slept in a week. There were 2 people in the waiting area. A young man holding a cloth to his forearm and an older woman with a rosary in her hands. The intake nurse looked up when I came through the door. I gave her Owen's name. I told her I was his grandfather. I told her I had medical decision-making authority under a document filed with Beaufort County Family Court, and I gave her the case number from memory because I had memorized it the day it was granted, 18 months ago. She typed something and picked up her phone. A minute later, a man in a white coat came through the swinging doors. He was probably 55, silver at the temples, the kind of build that tells you he played sports somewhere between college and the point where life got in the way. He looked at me the way people look at you when they are trying to place your face in a context that does not fit the one they are currently standing in. Then something shifted behind his eyes. "Walter Greer," he said. It was not a question. I had not seen Dr. Raymond Holt since the Telfair case in 2019. He had been the attending physician when we brought in a child from a domestic violence call in Port Royal. He had been the one who helped me understand what certain types of injuries looked like when they were not accidents, and what they looked like when someone very badly wanted you to believe they were. We had not parted on bad terms. We had parted on the terms that exist between two people who have seen something together that changes how you move through the world afterward. He looked at me for 2 more seconds. Then he looked at the nurse. Then he looked back at me. "Come with me," he said. He took me to a room at the end of the hall. Owen was on the table in a hospital gown, his right arm resting on a pillow, an IV line in his left hand. He looked smaller than 14. He looked like 6 years old, following me along the fence line, asking me questions. He looked at me, and something in his face came apart just slightly at the edges. The controlled version of relief that looks almost like grief because the effort of holding yourself together finally has somewhere to put itself down. I crossed the room and I'd put my hand on the top of his head the way I used to when he was small. I did not say anything for a moment. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply arrive. "I came," I said. "I knew you would," he said. Dr. Holt was standing near the door. He cleared his throat quietly. "Mr. Greer, can I speak with you in the hall for a moment?" In the hall, Raymond Holt showed me the X-rays on his tablet. He has a way of explaining things that is direct without being cold, which I have always respected. He walked me through what he was looking at. Owen's right radius was fractured, not a stress fracture. Not the kind of fracture you get from a fall on an outstretched hand, which is the most common mechanism in adolescence. The instinct to catch yourself is almost universal. This was a torsion fracture, a twisting injury, the kind of fracture that happens when a limb is grabbed and wrenched. "How old is this fracture?" I asked. "Based on the imaging, somewhere between 8 and 12 hours. I did the arithmetic. That put it in the mid-afternoon. Owen had been in that house with this injury since mid-afternoon. He had waited until after 2 in the morning until the neighbor heard him to get help. I held that in my chest for exactly as long as I needed to, and then I set it aside. There would be time for what that meant later. Right now, there was work to do. "Has anyone from the family been in contact with the hospital?" I asked. Raymond looked at me steadily. "His stepmother called about an hour ago. She said he had fallen off his bicycle. She said she would be in to sign paperwork in the morning." The bicycle. I noted the bicycle. "She is not listed as an emergency contact," I said. "She is not. You are. Who called Child Protective Services?" "I did," he said. 40 minutes ago. A SCDSS worker is on the way." I nodded. "Thank you, Raymond." He put his hand on my shoulder briefly. It was the gesture of one person acknowledging another person's very specific kind of pain. Then he went back to work, because that is what people like Raymond Holt do. I went back to Owen. I sat in the chair beside his table and I looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at me. He has never been a child who flinches from direct eye contact, which tells you something about the core of who he is. "I need you to tell me what happened," I said. "Take your time. Start wherever it feels right." He started in the kitchen, he and his stepmother. Her name is Renata. She married my son-in-law Gerald about 3 years after my daughter Patricia died, had argued about his grades. He had failed a quiz in his AP history class, which is the kind of thing that happens to 14-year-olds who are also carrying grief that nobody has properly addressed. The argument had escalated. He had turned to walk away, which is actually the correct response. He had learned that from me. And she had grabbed his arm. She grabbed it and she twisted it, he said, like she was trying to make me turn back around. And then it made a sound. And it hurt, and she let go. What did she say? He looked at the wall to the left of my head. She said I did it to myself. She said I was being dramatic. She said if I told anyone she'd tell Dad it was my fault and he would believe her. There it was. I had been a sheriff's investigator for 31 years. I had interviewed people who told the truth, and people who lied, and people who had told the same lie so many times they could no longer find the seam between the two. I knew what a threat disguised as a prediction sounded like, and I knew exactly what it meant when a child chose to wait in pain for 8 hours rather than call the person who was supposed to protect them. Gerald, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband, the father of this boy. I loved Gerald once, in the way you come to love the person who made your child happy. After Patricia died, that love had gotten complicated. After Renata arrived, it had gotten more complicated still. I had filed for grandparent visitation rights 14 months ago, when Owen had shown up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon during a school day and could not fully explain why he had walked 3 miles to get there. A family court judge had granted me visitation and, under certain conditions, medical decision-making authority. I had not told Gerald about the medical authority clause. There had been no reason to until now. Owen, I said, you did the right thing. Calling me was the right thing. He nodded. His jaw was doing that thing, the stubborn set that looks like his mother. Is Dad going to be mad? I thought about how to answer that honestly and with care. Your dad is going to have to think very carefully about some things, I said. But that is not your job. Your job right now is to let these doctors take care of your arm. My job is everything else. The SCDSS worker arrived at 4:15. Her name was Adrian. She was probably 35. And she had the particular kind of composure that belongs to people who have been doing hard work long enough that they no longer need to announce it. She interviewed Owen with me present, which I was within my rights to request. Owen told her what he had told me, clearly and without embellishment, which is all you can ask of anyone. At 4:50, Gerald arrived. I heard him before I saw him. His voice in the hallway, the particular register of a man who has been woken up and is frightened and is expressing that fear as aggression because that is the only tool he has for it. Renata was not with him, which I noted. When he came through the door of Owen's room and saw me sitting beside his son's bed, his face moved through several expressions very quickly. Fear first, which was appropriate. Then something that looked like relief, which surprised me. Then something harder and more defensive, which did not. Walter. What are you? How did you— Sit down, Gerald, I said. He looked at Owen. Owen looked to the wall. Why didn't you call me? Gerald said. To Owen, not to me. Owen did not answer. That silence was its own kind of answer, and I watched it land on Gerald's face in a way that I do not think he was fully prepared for. Gerald, I said. Sit down. I need to talk to you. He sat. I told him about the fracture. I told him about the mechanism, the torsion pattern, the grab and the twist. I told him about the 8-hour gap between injury and treatment. I told him what Owen had said about what Renata had told him would happen if he said anything. Gerald's face went through changes. I am not going to describe in detail because some things that happen between people in hospital rooms at 5 in the morning are private, even when they are also evidence. She wouldn't. He started. Gerald. I kept my voice level. I have had a lot of practice keeping my voice level. I am not asking you what she would or wouldn't do. I am telling you what the X-ray shows and what your son told the SCDSS worker at 4:30 this morning. Those are facts. They exist whether or not you want to revisit them. He put his head in his hands. I waited. I didn't know, he said finally. Into his hands. I know you didn't, I said. And I meant it. I do not think Gerald knew. I think Gerald is a man who loves his son, and who has also chosen, more than once, not to look too closely at things that would require him to act. Those two things can both be true at the same time. I had seen it in 31 years of working cases. What happens now? He said. Now Adrian from SCDSS finishes her assessment. Now you cooperate fully with everything she asks. Now Owen's arm gets set properly, and now you figure out how you are going to explain to your son why he chose to call me instead of you. Gerald looked up. His eyes were red. That last part, I said, is the one that matters most. Not to me, to him. Renata arrived at 6:10. She walked in with the particular energy of someone who has had time to prepare a story and is confident in it. She was carrying a paper cup of coffee from somewhere, which I noted because it is a detail that tells you something. A person who stops for coffee on the way to the emergency room where their stepchild is being treated for a fracture is a person who is not primarily operating from fear. She saw me standing near the window and her pace changed. Not much. A fraction. But I have been watching people's paces change for 31 years. Walter, she said. I didn't know you were here. I imagine not, I said. Gerald was on the other side of Owen's bed. He did not look up when she walked in. She looked from him to me and back. Has someone called CPS? There was a woman in the hallway who wouldn't tell me what she was doing here. That is Adrian, I said. She is a caseworker from SCDSS. She is here because the attending physician is a mandatory reporter, and what he observed is reportable under South Carolina law. The coffee cup moved in her hand. A small adjustment. Owen fell off his bicycle, she said. It was an accident. Renata. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The radiologist's report describes a torsion fracture of the radius consistent with forceful rotational force applied to the forearm. That pattern is not consistent with a bicycle fall. She looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at the floor. I want to call my attorney, she said. That is absolutely your right, I said. The phone is in your pocket. She made 2 calls in the hallway that I was not privy to. What I am privy to is what Adrian told me in the corridor at 7:30. After Renata had left the building without Gerald, the case had been formally opened. Owen would not be returning to the home on Marsh Point Drive until the investigation was complete. Under the provisions of the family court order I had filed 14 months ago, I had the standing to take temporary physical custody during an active SCDSS investigation. I had not told Gerald about that provision either. He found out when I showed him the document at 8 o'clock in the morning in a conference room off the main corridor, with a hospital social worker present. I watched him read it. I watched him understand what it meant. You planned this, he said. His voice was quiet. Not accusatory, exactly. More like a man reading a map and realizing he has been standing several miles from where he thought he was. I planned for the possibility that Owen might need someone in his corner, I said. I hoped I would never need to use it. He was quiet for a long time. She told me he was clumsy, he said finally, that he was always bumping into things, getting hurt. I let that sit in the room. Gerald. I kept my voice level. Your son walked 3 miles to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, 14 months ago, and could not explain why. I filed that paperwork the next day. He put his hands flat on the table. He was breathing carefully, the way you breathe when you are trying to keep something from leaving your chest that wants very badly to go. I need you to do something very difficult, I said. I need you to stop being the man who was married to my daughter and start being the father of my grandson. Those are not the same job right now." He did not answer. "I love Patricia," he said eventually. "I know you did. I missed her. And Renata was." "I know," I said. And I did know. Grief makes people make choices. I have seen it. I made my own strange choices in the years after Patricia died. I did not hold that against him. What I held against him was the Tuesday afternoon and the 3 miles and the fact that Owen had known at 13 years old that the person to call was not his father. "You can fix that," I said. "You cannot fix the 14 months. But you can fix what comes next." Owen was discharged at 10 in the morning with a cast on his right forearm that went from his wrist to just below his elbow. "Green, because that is his favourite colour," the nurse asked him, and he said green without hesitation. And that small ordinary moment of a boy choosing the colour of his cast made something ache in a way I was not fully prepared for. He walked out of Beaufort Memorial beside me. The morning was the particular kind of bright that South Carolina does in October. The light coming off the marsh water in a way that makes you understand why people stay in this place their whole lives. He got into my truck. He buckled his seatbelt with his left hand. "Are we going to your house?" he said. "For now," I said. "Is that all right with you?" He looked out the passenger window at the marsh. "Yeah," he said. "That's where I wanted to go." Renata retained an attorney, which she was entitled to do. The SCDSS investigation took 11 weeks. At the conclusion of that investigation, the case was substantiated. That is the word they use, substantiated, which is a careful bureaucratic word for something that is not careful at all. Renata was charged with unlawful conduct toward a child, a felony under South Carolina Code 63, 5-7. Gerald did not contest the findings. He also did not contest the modified custody arrangement that was presented to the family court judge 6 weeks after that. Owen now lives with me on a primary basis. Gerald has scheduled visitation twice a week, which he takes seriously and shows up for, which is the minimum I required of him. It is not the same as what Owen deserved. I want to be honest about that. A 14-year-old boy deserved to have a father who saw what was happening and put a stop to it before it required a torsion fracture and a neighbour's porch light and a borrowed phone at 2:47 in the morning. That is the truth, and I hold it plainly. But we work with what is, not what should have been. That is another thing 31 years taught me. Owen is in 9th grade now. He joined the cross-country team in September, which surprised me. And then it did not surprise me at all because he has always had that quality of being willing to go the distance when something matters to him. His AP history grade is a B+. He still asks me questions. I do not always know how to answer. He does not ask me why people lie anymore. I think he found out that part on his own. Last week, he was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and I was going over the fence line the way I do every evening. A habit from when my wife was alive, when it was something we did together. And when I came back inside, he looked up from his textbook and said, without any particular context, "I knew you'd come. When I called, I knew you would." I hung my jacket on the hook by the door. "I know you knew," I said. He went back to his homework. I started on dinner. The marsh outside the kitchen window was going gold in the late light, the way it does, the way it always does. That is the whole of it. That is what I want you to understand. When that child picked up a borrowed phone in an emergency room at 2:47 in the morning, he did not call hoping. He called knowing. There is a difference between those two things, and it is the distance between all the years I put into being the kind of person who shows up and the moment when that meant something real. Be that for someone. If you can, be the person in someone's life who makes the call a certainty rather than a hope. I do not know what else to tell you, except that I am grateful every day that I picked up the phone on the first ring, that my boots were by the door, that I had 4 seconds of stillness and 31 years of knowing what to do with them, and that the light on the marsh is still gold in October, and that my grandson chose green. I have thought about that phone call a lot in the months since it happened. Not the words Owen said. Those I had memorized by the time I pulled out of the hospital parking lot. But the fact that he called at all. The fact that he knew to call, that is the part I keep returning to, because it did not happen by accident. Nothing like that ever does. There is a version of my life where I spent those 14 months differently, where I saw Owen show up at my door on that Tuesday afternoon, walk 3 miles with no real explanation, and I chalked it up to a hard week and sent him home with a sandwich and a pat on the shoulder. A lot of people would have done exactly that. It would have been easier, it would have been warmer in some small immediate way, to not look too closely at what that walk meant. But I looked, and I filed the paperwork the next day, and 11 months after that, Owen was able to pick up a borrowed phone at 2:47 in the morning and dial my number without wondering whether I would come. That is cause and effect. It is not complicated, even when the emotions around it are. You make choices over years, quietly, without an audience, and those choices become the architecture of whether someone trusts you when it counts. Renata made choices too. She chose to use her hands on a child who was not hers to harm. And then she chose to lie about it. And then she chose to believe that a threat issued to a 14-year-old boy would hold. Each of those choices had a cost. She is paying it now, through the courts, through the case number that will follow her, through the absence of the family she dismantled piece by piece without seeming to notice she was doing it. Gerald made choices. He chose more than once not to look. I understand that impulse more than I would like to admit. Grief does strange things to a person's willingness to see clearly. After Patricia died, I had my own years of not looking at things that asked too much of me. But there is a limit to how long a person can afford that, and the limit is always set by whoever is depending on them. For Gerald, that limit was Owen. He ran past it, and now he is doing the slow, difficult work of finding his way back to a boy who needed him to look sooner. I do not carry anger about it the way I might have at 40. What I carry instead is something more useful. The understanding that character is not a fixed thing you either have or do not have. It is built, deliberately, out of small decisions made when no one is grading you. The decision to file paperwork nobody asks you to file. The decision to take 4 seconds before you walk into a room. The decision to tell a frightened child the truth plainly and without decoration, because he deserves the truth more than he deserves to be protected from it. Owen is figuring that out for himself now, at 14, faster than most people do at 40. He earned that understanding the hard way, which is the only way that actually sticks. He knows what it costs to stay silent. He knows what it feels like when the person you counted on shows up. He knows the difference between those two things in his bones. And I believe that knowledge is going to make him a different kind of man than he would have been otherwise. That is not a consolation for what happened to him. I want to be clear about that. There is no version of a broken arm and 8 hours of waiting alone that I would call a gift, but there is such a thing as refusing to let harm be the last word. You take what was done and you build something from the understanding of it, not because it makes the harm acceptable, but because it is the only dignified response available to you. I picked up on the first ring. I took 4 seconds. I drove 16 minutes. Do not wait to be asked. Build the kind of life where the call is a certainty. That is the only thing I know how to tell you.